Hi, I'm Zoe. 3 months ago, my parents threw me out of their house on my 28th birthday while my husband was deployed overseas. They called me ungrateful, said I was dragging the family name through the mud, and told me I had 30 minutes to pack my things and disappear. I left with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. But last week, my Navy SEAL husband's team had my parents escorted out of the Czech Republic. And suddenly, they're begging me to come home. The same people who said I was dead to them are now calling me their precious daughter. What changed? Well, let me tell you exactly what happens when you underestimate a woman married to someone who takes protecting family very seriously. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The February rain in Portland was hitting the windows like bullets that night, which should have been my first warning that this birthday was going to leave permanent scars. I stood in the kitchen of my childhood home, watching my mother Patricia arrange store-bought cupcakes on her finest china platter, while my father David paced behind her, checking his phone every 30 seconds like he was expecting news that would change everything. My brother Tyler sat at the breakfast bar, scrolling through his tablet with that smug expression he'd perfected since taking over Hamilton real estate development 2 years ago. The house felt different now, colder somehow, even though nothing had physically changed. Same cream walls, same family photos lining the hallway, same expensive furniture that my mother insisted on covering with plastic during the rainy season. But the warmth I remembered from childhood had evaporated somewhere along the way, replaced by this suffocating tension that made every family gathering feel like a business meeting, where I was the only one who hadn't received the agenda. My husband Marcus had been deployed to Eastern Europe for the past 4 months, part of some classified operation that he couldn't discuss over our brief video calls. The time difference meant our conversations happened at odd hours, stolen moments between his missions and my sleepless nights. Tonight was supposed to be special, my first birthday as a military wife, and I'd been looking forward to celebrating with my family while he served our country thousands of miles away. Instead, I felt like an outsider in my own childhood home, watching my family go through the motions of caring while their eyes held something I couldn't quite identify. Tyler cleared his throat, that deliberate sound he made when he wanted everyone's attention. He'd been doing it since we were kids, back when he discovered that being 2 years older meant he could command the room whenever he wanted to make an announcement. The habit had only gotten worse since he'd started wearing expensive suits and carrying himself like he owned every space he entered. "So Zoe," he began, not looking up from his tablet, "Dad and I were going over the Prague project numbers today." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. Interesting discoveries came to light. My stomach tightened. The Prague project had been my father's dream for the past 5 years. A massive commercial development deal that would establish Hamilton real estate development as a major player in international markets. I'd heard about it countless times during family dinners. Watched my father's eyes light up whenever he discussed the potential profits, the prestige, the legacy he'd leave behind. But I'd never been directly involved in the business side of things. My role had always been the supportive daughter, the one who asked interested questions and nodded appreciatively when he explained complex financial strategies. Patricia set down the cupcake platter with more force than necessary, the china plates rattling against each other. "Tyler, maybe we should wait until after dinner to discuss business matters." "No, Mom," Tyler said, finally looking up with that shark-like smile that made my skin crawl. "I think Zoe needs to hear this now, especially since it concerns her so directly." David stopped pacing and turned to face me, his expression unreadable. In the harsh kitchen lighting, he looked older than his 58 years, the stress lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. "Zoe, honey, we need to talk about some irregularities that have come to our attention." The word irregularities hit me like a physical blow. In business speak, irregularities meant problems, mistakes, things that could destroy careers and reputations. My hands started trembling, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "What kind of irregularities?" Tyler stood up, smoothing his tie with practiced precision. He'd always been theatrical, even as a child, but success had amplified his need for dramatic presentations. "Well, it seems that someone has been sharing confidential information about our Prague development with outside parties. Someone with access to our family conversations, our private planning sessions. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting, but my brain felt sluggish, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from birthday celebration to corporate interrogation. I don't understand what you're implying. We're not implying anything, David said, his voice taking on the stern tone he'd used when I was a teenager caught breaking curfew. We're stating facts. Marcus's military connections have been asking very specific questions about our Prague timeline, our investor meetings, our financial projections. Information that only family members would know. The room started spinning slightly, and I had to focus on breathing steadily to keep from hyperventilating. You think Marcus is somehow using me to spy on your business deals? That's absolutely insane. Patricia laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was sharp, bitter, the kind of laugh that cuts through pretense and exposes ugly truths. Insane? Zoe, your husband is a Navy SEAL with specialized training in intelligence gathering. You don't think it's convenient that he suddenly became interested in our family right around the time we started planning our biggest international expansion? The words hit me like a series of physical blows. Each accusation felt designed to strip away another layer of my identity, my sense of belonging, my understanding of my place in this family. Marcus didn't even know about the Prague project until after we were married. And he's never asked me about Dad's business. Ever. Tyler pulled out his tablet and swiped what looked like a document with official letterhead. These are inquiry records from the Department of Defense regarding Hamilton Real Estate Development's international activities. The request started 3 weeks after your wedding, Zoe. 3 weeks. I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications of what they were suggesting started to sink in. They weren't just accusing me of being careless with family information. They were suggesting that my marriage was some kind of elaborate intelligence operation, that Marcus had somehow manipulated me into becoming an unwitting spy against my own family. The idea was so absurd, so completely divorced from reality, that I almost laughed. But the expressions on their faces told me this wasn't a joke or a misunderstanding. They genuinely believed what they were saying, had convinced themselves that their daughter was capable of betraying them for a man she'd known for less than 2 years. The realization that they thought so little of my judgment, my loyalty, my basic character, was more devastating than any accusation they could have made. You're wrong, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You're completely wrong about Marcus, about me, about everything. David shook his head sadly, like he was disappointed but not surprised by my denial. Zoe, we've always supported your choices, even when we had reservations. But this marriage has brought nothing but complications to our family. Government scrutiny, background checks, questions about our business practices. That's normal when you marry someone in the military, I protested, feeling desperate now. They do security clearances for everyone. It doesn't mean anything sinister. Normal military background checks don't involve detailed financial audits of family businesses, Tyler said, his voice dripping with condescension. Normal security clearances don't require international banking records going back 15 years. Patricia moved closer, her face a mask of disappointed motherhood. Sweetheart, we know you didn't mean for this to happen. You're naive about men, about how they can use emotional manipulation to get what they want. Marcus saw an opportunity when he met you. The suggestion that I was too naive, too stupid, too emotionally weak to recognize manipulation made my hands clench into fists. These were the people who had raised me, who were supposed to know me better than anyone else in the world. Yet they were describing me like I was some kind of helpless victim who couldn't tell the difference between love and exploitation. Marcus loves me, I said, hating how defensive I sounded. He married me because he loves me, not because he's interested in Dad's real estate deals. Tyler scoffed, a sound that conveyed years of accumulated superiority. Zoe, think about it logically. What does a decorated Navy SEAL see in an elementary school teacher from Portland? What do you two actually have in common? The question was designed to wound, and it succeeded. Tyler had always been skilled at finding the exact words that would make me question myself, my worth, my place in any relationship. But hearing it now, on my birthday, in front of our parents who were nodding along like he was speaking obvious truths, felt like emotional surgery without anesthesia. We have everything in common, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. We care about the same things, we want the same kind of life. Do you? Patricia asked, her tone gentle but devastating. Because from where we're sitting it looks like you've been used, honey. And now our entire family business is under investigation. Because you fell for someone who saw you as a way to access information. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls moving closer with each accusation. I thought about Marcus, about the way his face lit up when he talked about our future together, about the hours we'd spent planning the small house we wanted to buy near the base in San Diego. Was it possible that I'd been wrong about everything? That the man I'd married was actually some kind of sophisticated manipulator who'd seen my family's wealth and decided I was worth pursuing for strategic reasons? But then I remembered the way he held me during thunderstorms, how he'd stayed up all night when I had food poisoning during our honeymoon, the careful way he'd asked my father for permission to marry me even though we were both adults who didn't need anyone's approval.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Those moments couldn't have been fake, couldn't have been calculated moves in some elaborate scheme. I know my husband, I said, trying to inject strength into my voice. And I know he would never do what you're suggesting. David sighed heavily, like he was tired of trying to reason with someone who refused to see obvious facts. Zoe, we've made a decision as a family. We can't have you living here anymore. Not while you're married to someone who's bringing this kind of scrutiny to our business. The words hit me like cold water, shocking and immediate. You're kicking me out? We're asking you to make a choice, Patricia said, her voice taking on that artificially sweet tone she used when she wanted to make harsh decisions sound reasonable. You can stay married to Marcus and figure out your own living situation, or you can get an annulment and come home where you belong. The ultimatum was delivered with the same casual tone she might use to ask whether I wanted coffee or tea, choose your husband or choose your family, as if love and loyalty were commodities that could be traded and exchanged based on business convenience. Tyler was watching me with undisguised satisfaction, like he'd been waiting for this moment for months. The Prague deal is worth $40 million, Zoe. We can't risk that kind of money because you're emotionally attached to someone who might be compromising our security. $40 million. The number hung in the air between us, a mathematical representation of exactly how much my family thought I was worth. Less than a business deal with people they'd never met, less than the potential profits from buildings they'd never see, less than the abstract concept of international prestige. So that's it? I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Choose Marcus or choose you? Choose wisely, David said, his tone suggesting the decision should be obvious. Choose your family. But as I looked around the room at these three people who shared my DNA but seemed like strangers wearing familiar faces, I realized they'd already made their choice. They'd chosen money over love, suspicion over trust, business over blood. They'd decided that their daughter was expendable, that her happiness was secondary to their financial security. The cupcakes sat on the counter, frosting slowly melting under the kitchen lights, a mockery of celebration in a room that felt more like a courtroom. My 28th birthday had become the trial where my own family had declared me guilty of crimes I'd never committed, sentenced me to exile for loving someone they'd decided was dangerous. I walked slowly toward the stairs, each step feeling like I was moving through thick water. Behind me, I could hear them talking in low voices, probably discussing logistics, timelines, the most efficient way to erase me from their lives while protecting their precious business deal. In my childhood bedroom, I pulled out the 2 suitcases I'd brought when I moved back in after Marcus deployed. The room looked exactly the same as it had when I was 16. Same flowered wallpaper, same white furniture, same photos of high school friends who'd scattered across the country years ago. It was like a museum exhibit of the person I used to be, before I understood that family love came with conditions and expiration dates. I packed methodically, folding clothes and toiletries, with the same careful attention I'd learned as a military wife. Everything fit into 2 suitcases and a backpack, my entire life condensed into 3 pieces of luggage that I could carry by myself. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was leaving with exactly as much as I could physically handle, because emotional support had been withdrawn without warning. When I came back downstairs, they were seated at the dining room table like a tribunal, their faces displaying various combinations of guilt, determination, and relief. Patricia had tears in her eyes, but she made no move to stop me. David was staring at his hands, apparently unable to meet my gaze. Tyler looked satisfied, like a problem had been efficiently solved. "This is really what you want?" I asked, giving them one final chance to remember that I was their daughter, not just a security risk. "This is what needs to happen," Patricia said, her voice breaking slightly. "For the good of the family." I nodded slowly, understanding finally that I had never been part of their definition of family. I was a satellite member, someone who could be included when convenient and discarded when troublesome. The revelation was crushing and liberating at the same time, like having a broken bone reset, painful but necessary for proper healing. The rain had intensified while I was packing, turning the driveway into a shallow lake that reflected the porch lights in fractured patterns. I loaded my suitcases into my car, an aging Honda Civic that had seen better days but still ran reliably. As I started the engine, I looked back at the house where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to ride a bike and baked Christmas cookies and brought home report cards that made my parents proud. None of that mattered now. History had been revised, relationships had been recontextualized, and I was no longer welcome in the place I'd always considered home. The people who'd taught me about love and loyalty had just demonstrated that both concepts had limitations I'd never imagined. I drove through the empty Portland streets, windshield wipers struggling against the rain, with no clear destination in mind. The budget motel near the airport seemed like the most logical choice. Anonymous, temporary, the kind of place where you could disappear while figuring out what came next. The desk clerk barely looked up when I registered, handing me a key attached to a plastic diamond that had seen better days. The room was exactly what I expected. Clean but worn, functional but depressing, the kind of space that existed solely for people in transition. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my birthday outfit, and tried to process what had just happened. My family had expelled me on my 28th birthday based on conspiracy theories and financial paranoia, choosing money over their own daughter. My phone sat silent on the nightstand. Marcus was probably asleep in whatever Eastern European time zone he was operating in, unaware that our marriage had just cost me my family and my home. I wanted to call him, to hear his voice, to have him tell me that everything would be okay, but military communications were restricted, and our next scheduled call wasn't for 3 days. The silence stretched on, broken only by the rain against the window, and the occasional car passing on the street below. I'd gone from daughter to exile in the space of a single conversation, from someone with a family and a support system, to someone completely alone in a motel room with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. Tomorrow I would need to figure out practical things, where to live, how to support myself, how to build a life that didn't depend on people who could withdraw their love without warning. But tonight, I sat in the dark and mourned the family I thought I had, the people I thought loved me unconditionally, the home I thought would always be available when I needed it. The birthday cupcakes were probably still sitting on the kitchen counter, frosting melted beyond recognition, a sweet reminder of celebrations that would never happen again. My parents were probably discussing damage control strategies, ways to minimize the impact of their decision on their business reputation. Tyler was probably already planning how to spin the story, how to make my absence seem like a natural evolution rather than a dramatic expulsion. But none of that was my problem anymore. I'd been declared a security risk and removed from the equation, freed from the responsibility of protecting people who'd never really protected me. The liberation was terrifying and exhilarating, like jumping from a burning building and discovering you could fly. I fell asleep still fully dressed, exhausted by emotion and overwhelmed by uncertainty. Outside, Portland continued its rainy routine, indifferent to personal dramas and family betrayals. Inside the motel room, I began the process of becoming someone new, someone who didn't need approval from people who'd confused love with leverage. The motel alarm clock's red numbers glowed 4:17 a.m. when I finally gave up on sleep and decided to face whatever came next. My body ached from sleeping in yesterday's clothes, and my eyes felt raw from hours of staring at water stains on the ceiling that looked like abstract paintings of everything I'd lost. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving behind that particular Portland silence that feels heavier than sound. I showered in the tiny bathroom with its flickering fluorescent light and questionable water pressure, letting the hot water wash away the residue of shock and betrayal that seemed to cling to my skin. In the steamed mirror, I looked like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, older somehow than I'd been 24 hours ago. The woman looking back at me had been abandoned by her family on her birthday, cast out like yesterday's newspaper because her love threatened their bank account. The coffee from the motel's breakfast area tasted like it had been brewed with disappointment and artificial flavoring, but the caffeine helped clear the fog in my brain enough to start making lists. I needed immediate shelter, income, and a way to contact Marcus without violating operational security protocols. Most urgently, I needed to understand exactly what kind of investigation my family was so terrified about, because their accusations had felt too specific to be entirely fabricated. My checking account balance made for grim reading. After paying for the motel room, I had enough money to last maybe 2 weeks if I lived on ramen noodles and avoided any unexpected expenses. My teaching certificate was valid in California, where Marcus was stationed, but finding a position mid-semester would be nearly impossible. The financial reality of my situation settled over me like a lead blanket, heavy and suffocating. I drove to a 24-hour diner near the Portland airport, the kind of place where travelers and insomniacs gathered in the early hours to contemplate life decisions over plates of hash browns and endless coffee refills. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and sensible shoes, seemed to recognize the particular brand of desperation I was radiating. "Rough night, honey?" she asked, filling my cup without being asked. "Rough life," I replied, attempting a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. She nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd seen countless people at their lowest points. Those have a way of getting better if you let them. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us are actually doors opening to better things. I wanted to believe her, but sitting in a fluorescent-lit diner at 5 a.m. with everything I owned packed into 2 suitcases felt more like doors slamming shut than opening. Still, her kindness was the first genuine warmth I'd felt since Marcus deployed, and I held on to it like a lifeline. My phone buzzed with a text message from Kira Thompson, my best friend since college. "Happy belated birthday! How was the family dinner? Call me when you get this." The message felt like it came from another universe, one where families celebrated birthdays instead of using them as opportunities for exile. I turned the phone face down, not ready to explain that my family dinner had ended with homelessness. 3 cups of coffee later, I'd made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I was going to drive to San Diego, to the naval base where Marcus was officially stationed, even though he was currently deployed overseas. Military spouses had support systems, resources, people who understood the unique challenges of loving someone whose job involved classified dangers. I'd never needed that community before, but desperation had a way of clarifying priorities. The drive from Portland to San Diego stretched out like a pilgrimage through landscapes that gradually transformed from Pacific Northwest green to California gold. I stopped only for gas and bathroom breaks, eating granola bars and drinking gas station coffee while talk radio filled the silence with other people's problems. Every mile south felt like distance from the life I'd known, the identity I'd constructed around being someone's daughter, someone's little sister. Somewhere outside Sacramento, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered, thinking it might be Marcus calling from a different line. "Zoe?" My mother's voice was small, uncertain, nothing like the confident woman who demanded I choose between my husband and my family just 18 hours earlier. "What do you want, Mom?" "I wanted to check if you were okay. Your father and I were worried about you." The concern in her voice might have moved me yesterday, but now it sounded like guilt wearing a disguise. "I'm fine. Living my life without family interference, just like you wanted. Honey, you know that's not what we wanted. We just need some time to sort this situation out, to make sure everyone's safe." "Safe from what? From me? From my husband who's literally risking his life serving our country? Patricia's voice became smaller, more defensive. The investigation is very serious, Zoe. These government agencies don't probe businesses without significant cause. We can't ignore the timing. The timing of what? Marcus proposing to me? Marrying me? Loving me? When exactly did those become crimes against the Hamilton family? There was a long pause, filled with highway noise and unspoken regrets. Where are you staying? We want to know you're somewhere safe. I'm staying somewhere that people don't think I'm a security threat for falling in love. Somewhere that people don't kick me out on my birthday. Zoe, please don't be dramatic. We never said you were a security threat. The gaslighting was so smooth, so automatic, that I almost doubted my own memory of the previous night's events. You accused my husband of marrying me to spy on your business. You made me choose between him and you. You told me to leave your house. Which part of that wasn't treating me like a security threat? We asked you to consider the possibility that you might have been manipulated. That's different. I pulled into a rest stop, needing to focus completely on this conversation without the distraction of driving. Mom, do you hear yourself? You're suggesting that I'm too naive to recognize emotional manipulation. Too stupid to know when I'm being used. That's your opinion of your own daughter. That's not. We just want to protect you. From what? From being happy? From being loved by someone who isn't impressed by Dad's money or Tyler's business success. From having a relationship that exists outside your control. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. We miss you already. Then you shouldn't have thrown me away. I ended the call and sat in the rental car, hands shaking with adrenaline and suppressed rage. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few truckers catching sleep in their cabs, and a family with small children stretching their legs near the picnic tables. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by families who treated love like a business transaction. My phone immediately started ringing again, but I turned it off and threw it into my purse. Whatever they had to say could wait until I'd reached San Diego, until I'd found my footing in a place where my value wasn't measured in quarterly profits and international development deals. The rest of the drive passed in a blur of desert landscapes and radio static. I'd never driven this route before, never had reason to visit Southern California except for brief trips with Marcus when we were dating. The naval base represented unknown territory, both geographically and emotionally. I was about to become a dependent military spouse in crisis, seeking help from institutions I barely understood. San Diego appeared gradually, desert giving way to suburban sprawl, and finally to the distinctive blue of the Pacific Ocean. The naval base was larger than I'd imagined, a small city unto itself with housing complexes, shopping facilities, and administrative buildings spread across what felt like square miles. The guard at the gate checked my military-dependent ID with professional courtesy, giving me directions to the Family Readiness Group office without asking why I looked like I'd been crying intermittently for 12 hours. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, the officer in charge of spouse support services, had the kind of competent warmth that made you believe problems could actually be solved rather than just endured. Her office was decorated with photos of naval families and motivational posters about resilience, but nothing felt forced or artificial. This was clearly someone who'd seen genuine crises and developed genuine strategies for addressing them. Mrs. Rivera, she said, using my married name with the same natural ease Marcus used when introducing me to his teammates. What brings you to San Diego? Is this related to your husband's current deployment? The question opened floodgates I'd been holding closed for hundreds of miles. I told her everything, the birthday dinner, the accusations, the ultimatum, the motel room, the drive south. She listened without judgment, taking notes occasionally, asking clarifying questions that helped me organize the chaos in my mind into something resembling a coherent narrative. So they believe your husband is using your marriage to gather intelligence about their business operations? She summarized when I finished. That's what they said. But it doesn't make sense. Marcus barely knows anything about real estate, and he's never shown any interest in my father's work. Lieutenant Commander Chen leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Mrs. Rivera, I need to ask you some direct questions, and I need you to answer them honestly. Have you ever shared information about your family's business with your husband? General things, sure. Like when my dad was excited about the Prague project, or when Tyler was being particularly arrogant about some deal he'd closed. Normal family conversation stuff. Did your husband ever ask specific questions about timelines, financial details, or investor information? I thought carefully, replaying conversations from our brief marriage and longer courtship. No, never. If anything, he seemed kind of bored when I talked about the real estate business. He's more interested in my teaching stories. Has your husband ever mentioned your family's business to his teammates or superior officers? I don't know. I mean, he talks about you guys as people, but not about work stuff. And he's never mentioned my family's business to me in relation to his job. Lieutenant Commander Chen made a note, then looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mrs. Rivera, I'm going to share some information with you that might help explain your family's concerns. 3 months ago, your father's company was flagged by the Department of Treasury for potential violations of international money laundering statutes. The words hit me like physical blows. Money laundering. Criminal activity. My father, who'd built his reputation on ethical business practices and community involvement, was under investigation for financial crimes. That's impossible. My dad would never do anything illegal. The investigation is preliminary, and no charges have been filed. But when government agencies investigate potential financial crimes, they routinely examine all family connections, especially those involving military personnel with security clearances. My mouth felt dry, and I had to swallow several times before I could speak. So Marcus really is being investigated because of me? Your husband is being investigated because standard protocols require background checks when family members are connected to potential financial crimes. It's not personal, and it doesn't indicate suspicion of wrongdoing on his part. But it could affect his career? Security clearance reviews are serious matters. If the investigation into your family's business uncovers criminal activity, it could impact your husband's ability to maintain his current clearance level. The realization crashed over me like cold water. My family hadn't been paranoid or irrational. Their fears were based on real consequences that could destroy Marcus's military career. The man I loved could lose everything he'd worked for because of his association with me, because of crimes my family might have committed without my knowledge. What kind of money laundering are they suspected of? I asked, dreading the answer. International real estate transactions sometimes involve complex financial structures that can be used to hide the source of funding. The Prague project your family is developing has attracted attention because several of the investors have ties to organizations that are under federal surveillance. My father's dream project, the deal that was supposed to establish his international reputation, was apparently funded by criminals. The $40 million they'd chosen over me was potentially dirty money, and their association with it had put Marcus's career in jeopardy. The irony was crushing. They'd accused him of being a security risk when they were the ones involved in questionable activities. Mrs. Rivera, I need you to understand something important. Your husband's commanding officers are aware of this situation. His deployment was actually extended partly to remove him from the immediate sphere of the investigation, while authorities determine the scope of your family's activities. Extended? For how long? That depends on how quickly the investigation concludes. It could be a few more weeks, or it could be several months. The room felt like it was spinning. Marcus wasn't just deployed on some routine mission. He was essentially in protective exile, while federal investigators determined whether his wife's family were criminals. Our marriage hadn't just cost me my family. It had potentially cost him his career and definitely cost him his freedom to return home. Is there anything I can do to help? I asked, feeling helpless but needing to try. The best thing you can do is maintain distance from your family's business activities and cooperate fully if investigators want to interview you. Beyond that, we have support systems in place for military spouses dealing with extended deployments and family crises. She handed me a folder filled with information about housing assistance, job placement services, and counseling resources. The practical support was welcome, but it couldn't address the emotional devastation of learning that my family's actions had endangered the man I loved. They'd painted Marcus as the threat while concealing their own criminal associations. Lieutenant Commander Chen, can I ask you something? In your experience, do these kinds of investigations usually find evidence of actual crimes? Her expression became carefully neutral. I can't comment on specific cases, but I will say that the Treasury Department doesn't initiate money laundering investigations without substantial preliminary evidence. The implication was clear. My family wasn't just under suspicion, they were likely guilty. The people who'd raised me, who'd taught me about honesty and integrity, who'd demanded I choose between them and my husband, were probably criminals. The revelation was nauseating, but it also explained their desperation to distance themselves from any military connections. I left the naval base with temporary quarters arranged in base housing and a clearer understanding of why my birthday had ended in exile. My family hadn't just been paranoid about government investigations, they'd been desperately trying to contain the damage from their own criminal activities. Marcus wasn't a threat to their business. He was a witness to their crimes, and by extension, so was I. The base apartment was small, but clean, furnished with the kind of practical furniture that prioritized function over aesthetics. It felt like a sanctuary after the motel room, a place where I could think clearly without the constant noise of traffic and strangers. Catherine flashed her credentials at the front desk, and we were immediately escorted to a family room on the second floor, past holding cells and interview rooms where I tried not to think about Derek sitting alone, finally facing consequences for his actions. Detective Morrison was a tall woman with graying hair, and the sort of calm competence that probably came from spending 20 years dealing with domestic disputes and custody violations. She shook hands with both of us, her grip firm and reassuring. "The children are in the victim services room with a social worker," she said. "They're physically unharmed, but they're confused and scared. Sophie's been asking for you constantly, and Mason's been very quiet. They don't understand why their father was arrested, or what's going to happen next." "Can I see them now?" The words came out sharper than I intended, desperation making my voice crack. "Of course. But first, I need you to understand what we're dealing with here. Your ex-husband isn't just facing state custody violations anymore. When he took the children across state lines with intent to permanently relocate them, this became a federal kidnapping case. The U.S. Attorney's Office is already involved, and they're taking this very seriously." Catherine nodded grimly. "What's the timeline for federal charges?" "Should be filed within 48 hours. Interstate kidnapping, custodial interference, possibly extortion depending on how they interpret the demands he made for returning the children. He's looking at serious federal prison time." The words should have felt like victory, like justice finally being served. Instead, I just felt exhausted, empty, like I'd been running on adrenaline for so long that my body had forgotten how to function normally. All I wanted was to hold my children and take them home and pretend this nightmare had never happened. "There's something else," Detective Morrison said, her expression growing more serious. "We found camping gear in Derek's car, along with cash, prepaid cell phones, and fake identification documents for him and the children. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. He's been planning this for weeks, maybe months." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been fighting for shared custody, attending mediation sessions, trying to co-parent civilly for the sake of Sophie and Mason, Derek had been plotting to steal them entirely. Family connections are scrutinized more heavily than business associations because they're assumed to involve emotional leverage and insider access. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. My family hadn't expelled me because they believed Marcus was a spy. They'd expelled me because they knew they were criminals, and my marriage to a Navy SEAL made me a liability they couldn't afford. The accusations against Marcus had been cover stories, distractions from their own guilt. "Kira, hypothetically, if someone found themselves in this situation, what would be their best legal strategy?" "Complete cooperation with federal investigators. Full disclosure of any relevant information, even if it incriminated family members. And probably finding a very good criminal defense attorney, because anyone connected to money laundering investigations needs professional legal protection." After ending the call, I sat in the small base apartment and contemplated the wreckage of everything I'd believed about my family, my marriage, and my life. Marcus was in protective exile because of my family's crimes. I'd been abandoned not because they doubted my loyalty, but because my loyalty to him threatened their criminal enterprise. The investigation that terrified them was probably justified. Tomorrow, I would contact federal investigators and offer my complete cooperation. I would tell them everything I knew about my family's business activities, their international connections, and their recent behavior. I would choose justice over blood, truth over loyalty, my husband's honor over my family's crimes. But tonight, I mourned the family I'd thought I had, the people I'd believed loved me unconditionally, the home I'd thought would always welcome me back. They'd never really existed, but the loss felt real anyway, like grieving someone who'd died while discovering they'd been lying to you for years. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beyond the base boundaries, vast and indifferent to human dramas. Somewhere across that water, Marcus was serving his country while federal investigators determined whether his wife's family were the kind of criminals he'd sworn to protect America against. The irony was devastating and clarifying at the same time. I'd been kicked out on my birthday for loving someone my family saw as a threat, but the real threat had been them all along. The federal building in downtown San Diego looked like every government office I'd ever seen. Sterile, imposing, designed to make visitors feel small and nervous. Special Agent Rebecca Walsh from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network had agreed to meet with me after I'd called their tip line and identified myself as David Hamilton's daughter. Her office was spartanly decorated, just a desk, 2 chairs, and wall-mounted certificates that testified to her expertise in following money trails that criminals thought they'd hidden. Agent Walsh was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made you feel like she was reading your thoughts before you'd finished thinking them. She'd agreed to this informal interview as a courtesy, she explained, but anything I said could potentially be used in their ongoing investigation. I signed the voluntary disclosure forms with steady hands, knowing that each signature was another step away from the family that had abandoned me. Mrs. Rivera, I appreciate you coming forward. Family members in these situations often feel conflicted about cooperating with federal investigations. Her voice was professional but not unkind, like a doctor delivering serious but not necessarily fatal news. I want to help however I can. My husband's career is being affected by this investigation, and I think my family hasn't been completely honest about their business activities. Agent Walsh opened a thick folder and pulled out several photographs that she arranged on the desk between us. They showed my father shaking hands with men I didn't recognize, standing outside buildings in what looked like European cities, sitting at restaurant tables with people who seemed vaguely familiar but whom I couldn't place. Do you recognize any of these individuals? She asked, pointing to the strangers in the photos. I studied each image carefully, trying to connect faces with names or conversations I might have overheard. No, I've never seen these people before. But I haven't been involved in my father's business operations for several years. What about this man? She pointed to a heavy-set individual with silver hair who appeared in 3 of the photographs. Viktor Kozlov. He's listed as a primary investor in the Prague development project. The name meant nothing to me, but something about his appearance triggered a vague memory. I think I might have heard his name mentioned at family dinners, but I can't remember in what context. Agent Walsh made a note, then pulled out what looked like bank records with certain sections highlighted in yellow. Mr. Kozlov has been under investigation by multiple international law enforcement agencies for suspected ties to organized crime syndicates operating in Eastern Europe. His investment in your father's Prague project represents approximately $15 million that may have been derived from illegal activities. $15 million of criminal money flowing through my father's supposedly legitimate business. The number was staggering, representing more money than I'd ever imagined being involved in any transaction, let alone one connected to my family. Are you saying my father knowingly accepted money from criminals? That's what we're trying to determine. Money laundering charges require proving that defendants knew the funds were derived from illegal activities. Your father's defense team will likely argue that he believed Mr. Kozlov was a legitimate businessman making a legal investment. Agent Walsh showed me more documents, financial transfers, email communications, meeting schedules that painted a picture of my father's business activities I'd never suspected. The Prague project wasn't just an ambitious real estate development. It was apparently a sophisticated money laundering operation disguised as legitimate international commerce. Mrs. Rivera, based on your knowledge of your father's character and business practices, do you believe he would knowingly participate in money laundering activities? The question forced me to examine memories I'd never analyzed critically before. My father had always been secretive about certain aspects of his business, claiming that competitive advantage required confidentiality. He'd taken unexplained trips to Europe, had private phone conversations in his study with the door closed, had insisted that family members never discuss his business activities with outsiders. I honestly don't know, I said finally. He's always been very private about his work, but I assumed that was normal for someone in his position. What about your brother Tyler? Has he ever mentioned concerns about the sources of their international funding? I thought about Tyler's behavior during my birthday dinner, his eagerness to present evidence against Marcus, his apparent relief when our parents decided to expel me from the family. Tyler has always been ambitious and money-focused, but I don't know if he would cross legal lines to achieve business success. Agent Walsh leaned back in her chair, studying my face with the intensity of someone trained to detect deception. Mrs. Rivera, I'm going to be direct with you. Your family's business activities have created serious complications for your husband's security clearance review. Military personnel can lose their clearances for having immediate family members involved in criminal enterprises, even if they have no personal knowledge of those activities. The confirmation of my worst fears hit like a physical blow. Marcus could lose his career, not because of anything he'd done, but because of who he'd married. The man who'd dedicated his life to serving his country could be destroyed by his association with my family's crimes. Is there anything I can do to protect his career? Complete cooperation with our investigation is the best way to demonstrate that you and your husband have no involvement in your family's potentially criminal activities. We also need to document the timeline of your relationship with your husband, to establish that his interest in you predated any knowledge of your family's business connections. Agent Walsh spent the next 2 hours walking me through a detailed chronology of my relationship with Marcus, from our first meeting at a military charity event to our wedding 6 months later. She asked about his questions regarding my family, his interactions with my relatives, his knowledge of their business activities. The interrogation was thorough but not aggressive, designed to establish facts rather than elicit confessions. Based on your testimony, it appears that your husband had minimal contact with your family's business operations and no apparent interest in their financial activities, she concluded. That should help with his security clearance review. Will he be able to come home soon? That depends on how quickly we can resolve the investigation into your family's activities. If we find evidence of criminal behavior, his clearance review should conclude favorably. If the investigation drags on without resolution, his career could remain in limbo indefinitely. Agent Walsh handed me her business card and a pamphlet about witness protection services, explaining that family members who cooperated with federal investigations sometimes faced retaliation from the subjects of those investigations. The suggestion that my own family might pose a physical threat to me would have seemed absurd a week ago, but nothing about my family seemed predictable anymore. I left the federal building feeling simultaneously relieved and terrified. Relieved that I'd taken concrete action to protect Marcus's career. Terrified that I'd potentially signed my family's criminal prosecution warrants. The late afternoon sun felt harsh after the fluorescent lighting of government offices, and the busy streets of downtown San Diego seemed surreal after hours of discussing money laundering and organized crime. My phone had been buzzing throughout the meeting, but I'd kept it silenced out of respect for Agent Walsh's time. Now I checked the messages and found increasingly frantic communications from my family. Tyler had called 6 times. My mother had sent a series of text messages that escalated from concerned to angry to threatening legal action if I didn't respond immediately. The final message, sent just 20 minutes earlier, was from my father. "Zoe, we know you're in San Diego. We're flying down tonight. We need to talk immediately. This is urgent." They knew where I was, which meant they'd either tracked my credit card usage or contacted the military base directly. The idea that they were coming to San Diego suggested desperation, a level of panic that confirmed my suspicions about their criminal activities. People who were genuinely innocent didn't fly across the country to confront family members who'd volunteered to cooperate with federal investigations. I drove back to the naval base with my hands shaking slightly, checking my mirrors constantly for signs that I was being followed. The security guards at the gate looked exactly the same as they had that morning, but now their presence felt protective rather than merely procedural. Whatever my family wanted to discuss, they'd have to do it on military property, under the observation of armed personnel trained to protect national security. Lieutenant Commander Chen was still in her office when I arrived, despite the late hour. Military schedules often extended well beyond normal business hours, and crisis management didn't respect time zones or personal convenience. She listened to my account of the federal meeting with the same professional attention she'd shown earlier, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. "Mrs. Rivera, I need to inform you that your family contacted our base commander this afternoon, requesting information about your whereabouts and claiming you were experiencing a mental health crisis." The gaslighting campaign was expanding beyond civilian friends to military authorities. My family was systematically undermining my credibility while positioning themselves as concerned relatives dealing with an unstable family member. What did the base commander tell them? Standard protocol in these situations is to neither confirm nor deny the presence of specific individuals on base, especially when those individuals are connected to ongoing federal investigations. Your family was told that if they had legitimate concerns about your welfare, they should contact local law enforcement. "They're flying down here tonight. They said it was urgent." Lieutenant Commander Chen's expression became more serious. "Mrs. Rivera, given the nature of the federal investigation and your family's apparent desperation to contact you, I'm going to recommend that you avoid any private meetings with them. If they want to speak with you, those conversations should take place in controlled environments with witnesses present." The suggestion that I needed protection from my own family would have been inconceivable a week ago, but the federal investigation had revealed that I'd never really known these people at all. They weren't just disappointingly materialistic or unusually ambitious. They were potentially dangerous criminals who'd built their success on illegal activities. "Can they force me to meet with them? You're an adult with no outstanding legal obligations to your family. You can refuse to see them, refuse to take their calls, and refuse to provide them with any information about your current situation. In fact, given your cooperation with federal investigators, maintaining distance from them might be legally advisable." That evening, I sat in the base apartment and tried to imagine what my family's emergency flight to San Diego represented. Were they coming to apologize, to threaten, to beg, or to negotiate? Had they discovered my meeting with federal agents? Or were they simply panicking about losing control over the narrative surrounding their business activities? My phone rang constantly throughout the evening, displaying my family's names in endless rotation. I let every call go to voicemail, creating a digital record of their increasing desperation. Tyler's messages evolved from concerned brother to angry businessman, demanding that I stop creating problems for the family. My mother's voicemails became increasingly tearful, pleading with me to remember my loyalty to the people who'd raised me. But it was my father's final message that revealed the true nature of their panic. "Zoe, honey, we know you think you're helping your husband by talking to federal agents, but you're actually making things worse for everyone. There are complexities to our business situation that you don't understand, and your interference could destroy not just our family but innocent people who depend on us for their livelihoods. Please call me back before you do anything else that can't be undone." The message was carefully crafted to sound reasonable and paternal, but it contained clear threats disguised as concerns. They knew about my meeting with Agent Walsh, which meant they either had sources within federal law enforcement or had been monitoring my activities somehow. They were positioning any further cooperation with investigators as betrayal of innocent employees, manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for pursuing justice. I forwarded the voicemail to Agent Walsh, along with a summary of my family's attempts to contact the naval base. If they were trying to intimidate a federal witness, they'd crossed a line that would only strengthen the case against them. Their desperation was becoming evidence of their guilt. The next morning brought news that my family had checked into a luxury hotel near the airport, apparently planning an extended stay in San Diego. Lieutenant Commander Chen informed me that they'd contacted base security again, this time claiming that I was being held against my will by military personnel. The accusation was serious enough to trigger an internal investigation, she explained. But base security had reviewed surveillance footage that clearly showed me coming and going freely. They're trying to create a record that portrays you as incompetent or coerced, she explained. It's a common tactic in criminal defense strategy, undermining the credibility of potential witnesses before they can testify. The realization that my family was treating me as an enemy to be neutralized, rather than a daughter to be protected, was devastating but clarifying. They weren't coming to San Diego to reconcile or apologize. They were coming to intimidate me into silence, to prevent me from providing evidence that could incriminate them. Agent Walsh called that afternoon with an update that changed everything. Mrs. Rivera, we've received intelligence that your family may be planning to leave the country within the next few days. We're moving to freeze their assets and prevent international travel while we finalize our investigation. The federal government was essentially preparing to arrest my family, based partly on evidence I'd provided and partly on their own behavior since learning about my cooperation. Their flight to San Diego hadn't been a family rescue mission. It had been a last-ditch attempt to control a witness before fleeing the country. Will they be arrested? That depends on what our asset seizure reveals and whether they attempt to leave the United States. If they try to board international flights, they'll be detained for questioning. What about me? Am I in any danger? We don't have any specific threats against you, but people facing serious federal charges sometimes make desperate decisions. I'd recommend maintaining your current security arrangements until this situation resolves. That afternoon, I received a text message from an unknown number. Zoe, this is your cousin Lisa. Your parents asked me to contact you because they're worried you're not thinking clearly. They love you and want to help, but they're afraid to approach you directly because they think you might have been influenced by outside forces. Can we meet somewhere public to talk? They just want their daughter back. Lisa Chen was Tyler's wife, someone I'd always considered family despite her obvious loyalty to my brother's interests. The message was clearly orchestrated by my family, an attempt to use someone I trusted to arrange a meeting they couldn't achieve directly. But the phrasing about outside forces and not thinking clearly continued their campaign to portray me as mentally unstable. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Agent Walsh, adding, "This is the kind of manipulation I grew up with. They're using family connections to arrange contact after I've refused their direct approaches." Her response came within minutes. "Do not meet with any family members or their associates. They're likely trying to either intimidate you into silence or document your mental state for potential legal challenges to your testimony." The chess game was becoming clearer. My family wasn't just trying to escape consequences for their crimes. They were systematically building a defense strategy that portrayed me as an unreliable witness suffering from mental health issues, influenced by my military husband to betray my own family. Every contact attempt, every voicemail, every message, through intermediaries, was being crafted to support that narrative. But I'd spent my adult life as an elementary school teacher, someone trained to recognize manipulation and protect vulnerable people from exploitation. I understood exactly what they were doing, and I had resources they'd never anticipated: military support systems, federal protection, and most importantly, the truth about their criminal activities. That evening, I composed a single text message that I sent to every family member who'd been trying to contact me. "I am safe. I am thinking clearly. And I am making my own decisions based on complete information about your business activities. I will not be meeting with any of you while you are under federal investigation. My cooperation with law enforcement is voluntary and informed. Please respect my decision and stop contacting me." The response was immediate and revealing. Tyler texted back within minutes. "You have no idea what you've done to this family. Dad's worked his entire life to build something meaningful, and you're destroying it because you're angry about a birthday dinner." My mother's message was longer and more emotional. "Zoe, please remember that we love you no matter what. We may have made mistakes, but we're still your family. Don't let government agents turn you against the people who raised you." But it was my father's response that confirmed everything Agent Walsh had suggested about their desperation. "Zoe, there are consequences to the choices you're making that extend beyond our family. People will be hurt by your actions, and those consequences will be on your conscience forever. The threat was subtle but clear. If I continued cooperating with federal investigators, if I provided evidence that resulted in criminal charges, innocent people would suffer, and I would be responsible for their pain. It was emotional blackmail disguised as paternal concern, manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for pursuing justice. I forwarded all 3 messages to Agent Walsh, then turned off my phone and sat in the quiet of the base apartment. Tomorrow would bring new developments in a case that was moving faster than anyone had anticipated. My family was running out of time and options, growing more desperate and potentially more dangerous with each passing hour. But for the first time since my birthday disaster, I felt genuinely strong. I wasn't the naive daughter they'd counted on to protect their secrets, and I wasn't the mentally unstable witness their defense strategy required. I was a woman who discovered that love meant choosing justice over loyalty, truth over convenience, and protection of the innocent over protection of criminals. Marcus was still serving his country in Eastern Europe, unaware that his wife was helping federal agents build a case against her own family. But soon, if Agent Walsh was right, he'd be able to come home to a woman who'd proven herself worthy of his service and sacrifice. The family that had abandoned me was about to face consequences they'd never imagined, while the family I'd chosen was about to be protected from the criminal associations that had threatened to destroy it. The call came at 3:47 a.m., jarring me from restless sleep in the base apartment. Agent Walsh's voice was crisp, despite the early hour, carrying the kind of focused energy that comes from breaking developments in federal investigations. "Mrs. Rivera, we need you to come to the federal building immediately. Your family attempted to board a private jet to Prague 2 hours ago. They're currently in federal custody, and we need your help with some identification procedures." My hands shook as I pulled on clothes in the dark, the reality of the situation settling over me like cold water. My family hadn't just been planning to flee the country, they'd actually tried to do it, confirming every suspicion about their guilt and desperation. The people who'd raised me, who taught me about right and wrong, were now sitting in federal detention cells because they'd chosen crime over family. The federal building was buzzing with activity, despite the pre-dawn hour. Agents moved through hallways with purpose, carrying boxes of evidence and speaking in the urgent tones that accompany major arrests. Agent Walsh met me in the lobby, her professional demeanor unchanged, despite what had obviously been a sleepless night coordinating the operation. "Your family was detained at a private airfield outside San Diego," she explained as we walked toward the elevator. "They'd chartered a jet under false names and were attempting to leave the country with approximately $2 million in cash and jewelry, $2 million in physical assets, prepared for immediate flight. The number represented more liquid wealth than most people accumulated in a lifetime, casually assembled for an escape plan that suggested they'd been preparing for this possibility for weeks or months. Were they planning to come back? Based on what we found in their hotel rooms and the nature of their travel arrangements, this appears to have been a permanent departure. They'd liquidated most of their domestic assets and transferred funds to offshore accounts that would have been accessible from Europe." We entered a conference room where multiple computer screens displayed financial records, photographs, and what looked like surveillance footage. Agent Walsh gestured toward a chair across from a large monitor that showed frozen frames of security camera recordings. "We need you to confirm the identities of several individuals who met with your family yesterday afternoon. These meetings took place after your family learned about your cooperation with our investigation, and we believe they were attempting to coordinate their escape strategy." The first video clip showed my father sitting in what appeared to be a hotel bar, speaking intensely with a man I didn't recognize. The conversation looked serious, urgent, with both men checking their phones frequently and glancing around as if they were concerned about surveillance. "I've never seen that man before," I said, studying his face carefully. "But my father looks terrified." "The individual is Dmitry Volkov, Viktor Kozlov's business associate. He flew into San Diego yesterday morning, approximately 6 hours after your family arrived. We believe he was sent to coordinate their extraction from the United States." Agent Walsh played several more clips, each showing my family members meeting with different individuals in various locations around San Diego, Tyler appeared in one video, handing a briefcase to a woman in an expensive suit. My mother was shown in another, embracing someone who looked like a family friend but whom I couldn't identify. Mrs. Rivera, we also need you to review some documents that were seized from your family's hotel rooms. These materials may help us understand the scope of their criminal activities and their connections to international organized crime. She handed me a folder containing photocopies of documents in multiple languages, some bearing official-looking seals and signatures. Most were incomprehensible to me, written in what appeared to be Czech or Russian, but a few pages contained English translations that made my stomach turn. The documents detailed money transfer agreements, property ownership arrangements, and what looked like profit-sharing contracts between Hamilton Real Estate Development and several organizations with names that sounded more like military units than businesses. The Prague project wasn't just a real estate development. It was apparently a complex money laundering operation designed to legitimize millions of dollars in criminal proceeds. How long has this been going on? I asked, overwhelmed by the scope of what I was seeing. Based on these documents and our ongoing investigation, your family's involvement in money laundering activities appears to date back at least 5 years. The Prague project represents the largest and most sophisticated operation they've attempted. 5 years of criminal activity, 5 years of family dinners, where my father discussed his business success while concealing its illegal foundation. I thought about all the times he'd seemed stressed about work, all the private phone calls and mysterious trips, all the expensive purchases that had seemed inconsistent with legitimate real estate profits. Did my mother and Tyler know about all of this? The evidence suggests that all 3 family members were aware of and actively participating in the money laundering scheme. Your mother's signatures appear on numerous financial documents, and your brother was apparently responsible for coordinating the day-to-day operations. The revelation that my entire family had been living double lives was nauseating but also clarifying. Their treatment of me hadn't been an aberration. It had been consistent with their willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone for financial gain. I'd been expendable because everyone in their world was expendable, except the criminal associates who funded their lifestyle. Agent Walsh showed me surveillance photographs taken outside Prague hotels and restaurants. Images that showed my family meeting with individuals who looked more like international criminals than business partners. The photos spanned several months, documenting a pattern of clandestine meetings that had apparently been building toward the major money transfer that triggered federal attention. Mrs. Rivera, we believe your family was planning to relocate permanently to Prague, where they would have been protected by their criminal associates and beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement. Your cooperation with our investigation accelerated their timeline and forced them to attempt an emergency extraction. The idea that my family had been planning to abandon everything they'd built in Portland, including me, was devastating but not surprising. They'd already demonstrated their willingness to cut family ties when those relationships threatened their criminal activities. Permanent exile would have been the logical next step. What happens to them now? They're facing federal charges for money laundering, conspiracy, and attempted flight to avoid prosecution. The minimum sentences for these crimes are significant, and the international scope of their activities makes them ineligible for most plea arrangements. Agent Walsh's phone buzzed, and she checked the message with an expression that suggested important developments. Mrs. Rivera, I've just received confirmation that your husband's commanding officer has been notified about these arrests. His security clearance review has been expedited, and he's being recalled from deployment immediately. The news that Marcus would be coming home felt surreal after weeks of uncertainty about his career and our future. His exile was ending because of my family's arrest, their criminal activities finally exposed and prosecuted. The investigation that had threatened to destroy his military service had instead vindicated him completely. When will he be back? Military transport arrangements are being finalized, but he should be stateside within 72 hours. His commanding officer wants to debrief him personally and ensure that his security clearance is fully restored, without any lingering complications. Agent Walsh gathered the documents and photographs, preparing to move to the next phase of what was obviously going to be a complex prosecution. Mrs. Rivera, I want you to understand that your cooperation has been essential to this investigation. Without your testimony and the information you provided, Your family might have successfully fled the country and continued their criminal activities from abroad. The weight of what I'd accomplished settled over me slowly. I'd helped federal agents arrest my own family, provided evidence that would likely result in lengthy prison sentences for the people who'd raised me. The decision had protected Marcus's career and probably prevented additional crimes, but it had also made me an orphan by choice. Will I need to testify at their trial? That depends on whether they accept plea agreements or insist on going to trial. Your testimony would be crucial if the case proceeds to court, but many defendants in these situations choose to negotiate rather than face the full scope of federal prosecution. I left the federal building as the sun was rising over San Diego, painting the sky in colors that seemed too beautiful for such a dark morning. My family was in federal custody, facing the consequences of years of criminal activity that I'd helped expose. Marcus was coming home to a wife who'd chosen justice over blood, truth over loyalty. The drive back to the naval base felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. The investigation that had started with accusations against Marcus had ended with the arrest of the real criminals. The family that had abandoned me for loving someone they saw as a threat had revealed themselves to be the actual threat to everything decent and lawful. Lieutenant Commander Chen was waiting in her office when I arrived, despite the early hour. Military schedules often accommodated crisis situations, and the arrest of a service member's in-laws certainly qualified as a crisis requiring immediate attention. Mrs. Rivera, I've received official notification that your husband will be returning to San Diego on Friday. His security clearance has been fully restored, and his commanding officer has recommended him for commendation based on his professional conduct during this difficult period. The idea that Marcus might receive recognition for maintaining his integrity while his wife's family was under criminal investigation was both ironic and appropriate. He'd served his country honorably while married to someone whose family was working with international criminals, never knowing that his dedication to duty was being tested by circumstances beyond his control. Will this affect his future assignments? On the contrary, his handling of this situation has impressed his superior officers. Military leadership values personnel who can maintain operational effectiveness despite personal challenges, and your husband has demonstrated that quality under extraordinary circumstances. Lieutenant Commander Chen handed me a folder containing information about spouse support services, counseling resources, and legal assistance programs. The military took care of its families, she explained, especially when those families had been victimized by criminal activity. Mrs. Rivera, I want you to know that your decision to cooperate with federal investigators has been noted in your husband's personnel file as evidence of your family's commitment to lawful conduct and national security. That notation will be beneficial for his career advancement. The irony was striking. My family's criminal activities had initially threatened Marcus's career, but my response to discovering those crimes had actually enhanced his professional reputation. The investigation that had started as a potential disaster had become a testament to our shared values and commitment to justice. That afternoon, I received a call from a public defender's office in San Diego. My family had requested legal representation, and their attorney wanted to discuss the possibility of my providing character testimony that might help with plea negotiations. The request was both predictable and insulting. They wanted me to help minimize the consequences of crimes I'd helped expose. I'm not interested in helping them avoid accountability for their criminal activities, I told the attorney. They made their choices, and they can face the consequences. Mrs. Rivera, I understand you're angry with your family, but these are serious charges that could result in decades in federal prison. Surely you don't want to see your parents and brother spend the rest of their lives incarcerated. The attempt to manipulate my emotions was so transparent that I almost laughed. They didn't consider the consequences to innocent people when they were laundering money for international criminals. They didn't consider the impact on my husband's career when they were building their criminal enterprise. I'm not going to help them now. Your family is claiming that you've been influenced by your military connections to betray them, that you're not thinking clearly about the implications of your cooperation with federal agents. The gaslighting continued even from federal custody, the same narrative about my mental instability and external influence that they'd been pushing since my birthday dinner. My family can claim whatever they want. The evidence speaks for itself. I ended the call and immediately contacted Agent Walsh to report the attempt to secure my cooperation for their defense strategy. The conversation had been recorded, she informed me, as part of standard monitoring procedures for federal detainees. My refusal to help would actually strengthen the prosecution's case by demonstrating their continued attempts to manipulate witnesses. That evening, I sat in the base apartment and contemplated the complete transformation of my life in less than 2 weeks. I'd gone from being someone's daughter to being someone's widow in the eyes of my biological family. From being a potential security risk to being a protected federal witness. From fearing for my husband's career to celebrating his vindication. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown international number. The message was brief but chilling. Your family's friends remember their loyal associates. Consider your choices carefully. The threat was obvious despite its careful wording. My family's criminal associates were aware of my cooperation with federal investigators and wanted me to understand that there could be consequences for my testimony. The international nature of the money laundering scheme meant that dangerous people in multiple countries now considered me an enemy. I screenshot the message and forwarded it immediately to Agent Walsh, along with a note explaining that I was receiving what appeared to be threats from international criminal organizations. Her response was swift and reassuring. Federal witness protection protocols were already in place, and any attempts to intimidate or harm federal witnesses would be met with the full force of international law enforcement cooperation. The next morning brought news that fundamentally changed everything. Agent Walsh called with an update that she delivered in the tone of someone sharing extraordinary developments. Mrs. Rivera, we've received intelligence through military channels that your husband's SEAL team has been tasked with a special operation related to your family's criminal associates. I can't provide details about ongoing military operations, but I can tell you that international criminal organizations sometimes find themselves in conflict with U.S. Special Operations Forces. The implication was staggering. Marcus's Navy SEAL team was apparently being deployed against the same criminal network that my family had been working with. The investigation that had started with accusations that he was using me to spy on my family had evolved into a situation where he might be directly confronting the criminals who'd threatened his wife. Is he in danger because of this situation? Navy SEALs are always in danger when they're conducting operations against international criminal organizations. But your husband and his teammates are among the most highly trained special operations personnel in the world. They're well equipped to handle any threats they might encounter. Agent Walsh's confidence was reassuring, but the idea that Marcus might be in combat against people who'd threatened me was terrifying and satisfying at the same time. The criminal network that had corrupted my family and intimidated federal witnesses was about to discover that threatening a Navy SEAL's wife brought consequences they hadn't anticipated. Will I be told when the operation is complete? Military operations are classified, but you'll be notified when your husband is safely back in U.S. territory. In the meantime, federal protection protocols remain in place for your safety. I spent the rest of the day trying to process the surreal nature of my situation. My family was in federal custody for money laundering, my husband was potentially in combat against their criminal associates, and I was under federal protection as a witness in an international criminal investigation. The quiet elementary school teacher who'd been kicked out on her birthday had become a central figure in a complex operation involving federal law enforcement and Navy SEAL teams. That evening, I received an encrypted message through military communication channels. The sender was identified only as, quote, Team 7 Command, but the message was clearly from Marcus's unit. Target package secured. All personnel safe and accounted for. Primary objective achieved with 0 casualties. Secondary objectives exceeded expectations. Package contents included evidence of extensive criminal network targeting U.S. military families. Operation complete. Personnel returning home immediately. The military language was deliberately vague, but the implications were clear. Marcus's team had successfully completed their mission against the criminal organization that my family had been working with. They'd not only achieved their primary objectives, but had apparently discovered evidence of additional crimes targeting military families. Most importantly, they were all safe and coming home immediately. The threats against me had been neutralized, not by diplomatic negotiations or legal proceedings, but by Navy SEALs conducting direct action against international criminals. The people who'd thought they could intimidate a federal witness had discovered that threatening military families brought swift and decisive retaliation. My phone rang with a call from Lieutenant Commander Chen. "Mrs. Rivera, I've received official notification that your husband's team has completed their deployment successfully. They'll be arriving at Naval Base Coronado tomorrow evening, and your husband has requested immediate family reunion protocols." Marcus was coming home victorious from an operation that had apparently targeted the same criminals who'd corrupted my family and threatened my safety. The investigation that had started with my birthday dinner disaster was ending with my husband's triumphant return from a mission that had protected not just me, but other military families from international criminal networks. The symmetry was poetic in its justice. My family had accused Marcus of being a security threat while concealing their own criminal activities. Now Marcus had helped eliminate the actual security threat while my family faced the consequences of their crimes. The people who'd demanded I choose between them and my husband had forced a choice that revealed exactly who deserved my loyalty. The military transport plane touched down at Naval Base Coronado at 1,847 hours on a Thursday evening that felt like the end of one life and the beginning of another. I stood on the tarmac with other military families, but unlike the joyful reunions happening around me, my homecoming carried the weight of everything that had changed while Marcus was deployed. He was returning not just from a successful mission, but to a wife who had helped destroy her own family to protect his career and their marriage. Marcus emerged from the aircraft in full tactical gear, his face showing the exhaustion that comes from weeks of high-stress operations in hostile territory. But when his eyes found mine across the crowded tarmac, his expression transformed into something I'd never seen before, a mixture of pride, relief, and protective fury that made my knees weak. He dropped his equipment bag and crossed the distance between us in long strides that suggested barely controlled emotion. When he reached me, he didn't speak immediately. Instead, he cupped my face in hands that were rougher than I remembered, studying my features like he was memorizing them all over again. The silence stretched between us, filled with months of separation and revelations that had fundamentally changed everything we thought we knew about our life together. "Zoe," he said finally, his voice carrying the hoarse quality that comes from commanding men in combat situations. "I'm so proud of you I can barely find words." The simple statement broke something loose inside me, and I started crying for the first time since my birthday dinner disaster. Not the bitter tears of betrayal or the frustrated tears of helplessness, but the cleansing tears of someone who'd survived something that should have destroyed her and emerged stronger on the other side. Marcus pulled me against his chest, and I could feel the solid reality of his presence, the proof that he'd returned safely from whatever dangers he'd faced, while protecting me from threats I'd never fully understood. His arms felt like the only safe place left in the world, a sanctuary where I could finally stop being strong and just be grateful. "I know what you did," he whispered against my hair. "I know what it cost you, and I know why you did it. You saved my career, you protected other military families, and you chose justice over everything else. I've never been more honored to call someone my wife." Lieutenant Commander Chen approached us with the respectful distance that military personnel maintained during family reunions. But her presence reminded me that even this moment was part of official procedures. Marcus would need to be debriefed. His mission would need to be documented. And the intersection between his deployment and my family's arrest would need to be formally reviewed. "Sergeant Rivera, welcome home. We need to schedule your debrief for tomorrow morning, but tonight belongs to your family." She turned to me with a smile that conveyed genuine warmth. "Mrs. Rivera, your husband's commanding officer has asked me to inform you that your cooperation with federal investigators has been noted in his personnel file as exemplary conduct by a military spouse. That notation will follow him throughout his career." Marcus kept one arm around me as we walked toward the parking area, but I could feel the questions radiating from him like heat. He knew the broad outlines of what had happened, my family's arrest, their criminal activities, the federal investigation, but he didn't know the personal details. the emotional devastation of discovering that the people who'd raised me were not who I'd believed them to be. "How much do you know about what happened while you were deployed?" I asked as we drove toward the base housing complex. "I know your family was arrested for money laundering. I know they tried to flee the country. I know you provided evidence that helped federal agents build their case." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "And I know they threatened you after you started cooperating with investigators." The last part was delivered in a tone that suggested barely controlled violence, the voice of someone who'd spent his career eliminating threats to American interests and had discovered that his wife had been threatened by international criminals. I realized that Marcus's recent deployment hadn't been routine, it had been personal in ways that military operations rarely were. "Marcus, what exactly did your team do overseas?" He was quiet for several minutes, navigating traffic with the precise attention to detail that characterized everything he did. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the careful neutrality of someone discussing classified operations without violating security protocols. "Let's say that certain criminal organizations discovered that threatening American military families brings consequences they hadn't anticipated. The individuals who sent you threatening messages will not be sending any more messages to anyone." The implication was clear, without being explicitly stated. Marcus's Navy SEAL team had eliminated the international criminals who had been working with my family and threatening federal witnesses. The mission had been both professional and personal, serving national security interests while protecting his wife from people who'd thought they could intimidate her with impunity. "Were you in danger?" "I'm always in danger when I deploy, but this operation had additional motivation that made the risks feel more acceptable." We pulled into the driveway of base housing that had been assigned to us, a small but comfortable home that represented stability and safety after weeks of uncertainty. Marcus carried both of our bags inside, moving with the efficient economy of motion that came from years of military training, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the alertness that suggested he was still processing the transition from combat operations to domestic life. The house felt different now, no longer just temporary quarters while we figured out our next steps, but an actual home where we could build a life free from the criminal associations that had threatened to destroy everything we'd worked for. I watched Marcus methodically check door locks and window latches, habits ingrained by years of security awareness, but also specific precautions prompted by recent threats against his family. "Zoe, I need you to understand something," he said, settling beside me on the couch with the careful distance of someone who wasn't sure how much physical comfort was welcome. "What you did while I was deployed, the way you handled discovering your family's criminal activities, the strength you showed in cooperating with federal investigators, that's the kind of courage I see in the best military personnel I've ever worked with." The comparison to his fellow service members was the highest compliment he could offer, recognition that my actions had met the standards of people whose job required daily acts of bravery. Coming from someone who'd dedicated his life to protecting others, the praise felt both overwhelming and validating. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified most of the time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite being afraid. You chose to protect me, protect other military families, and uphold justice even though it meant losing everyone you'd grown up with. That's not just brave, it's heroic. Marcus reached into his gear bag and pulled out a folder marked with official Navy letterhead. "My commanding officer asked me to share this with you personally. It's a commendation letter acknowledging your service to national security and your exemplary conduct as a military spouse during a federal investigation." I opened the folder with shaking hands, reading words that officially recognized my cooperation with federal agents as a contribution to national security. The letter praised my unwavering commitment to justice and the rule of law, and noted that my actions had significantly contributed to the disruption of an international criminal network targeting U.S. military personnel. "This is really happening," I said, still processing the surreal nature of receiving military recognition for helping arrest my own family. "Your family's criminal associates had been targeting military spouses for months, trying to recruit them for intelligence gathering and money laundering operations. Your cooperation didn't just protect me, it helped us identify and eliminate a threat to dozens of other military families." The revelation that my family's crimes had been part of a larger pattern targeting military personnel added another layer of violation to everything I'd discovered. They hadn't just been laundering money, they'd been participating in operations designed to compromise national security by exploiting the families of service members. How many other families were affected? The intelligence we gathered during our operation suggests that this criminal network had attempted to recruit at least 15 military spouses over the past 2 years. Most of them didn't realize they were being manipulated. But your family's case was different because they were actively facilitating the recruitment efforts. My family hadn't just been criminals, they'd been traitors, using their connection to me to help foreign criminal organizations target other military families. The betrayal felt complete now, encompassing not just personal abandonment but actual treason against the country Marcus served. What happens to the other families? They're being contacted by appropriate authorities and provided with the same support services you received. None of them will face legal consequences because they were victims, not participants. Marcus's phone buzzed with what appeared to be an official message. He read it quickly, his expression shifting from neutral to satisfied. Zoe, I just received confirmation that your family's plea hearing is scheduled for next week. They're apparently ready to accept federal plea agreements rather than go to trial. The news that my family was pleading guilty felt both anticlimactic and appropriate. They'd realized that the evidence against them was overwhelming, that their attempt to flee the country had eliminated any possibility of claiming innocence, and that cooperation with prosecutors was their only hope of avoiding maximum sentences. Will I need to testify? Their plea agreements include full confession to all charges, so your testimony won't be necessary. They'll be sentenced based on their admissions of guilt and the evidence federal agents collected independently. The relief of not having to face my family in court was profound. I'd been prepared to testify if necessary, to look them in the eye while describing how their criminal activities had threatened my marriage and endangered national security. But avoiding that confrontation felt like a gift, an opportunity to move forward without relitigating the details of their betrayal. What kind of sentences are they looking at? Federal money laundering charges carry minimum sentences of 5 years, but the international scope of their activities and their attempt to flee prosecution will likely result in longer terms. They're probably looking at 8 to 12 years in federal prison. 8 to 12 years. The numbers felt abstract, disconnected from the reality of parents and a brother who'd be spending the better part of a decade in federal custody. But when I tried to feel sadness about their fate, all I could summon was a hollow sense of justice being served. They'd chosen crime over family, money over morality, and now they were facing the consequences of those choices. Marcus's phone rang with a call from his commanding officer, a brief conversation that ended with him accepting what sounded like new assignment details. When he hung up, his expression carried the mix of pride and anticipation that came with career advancement. I've been offered a position with an elite counterterrorism unit based here in San Diego. It's a promotion that comes with increased responsibilities and higher security clearance requirements. He paused, studying my face carefully. But it also means more deployments, more time away from home, more danger. The opportunity was clearly important to his career, the kind of assignment that military personnel worked their entire careers to achieve. But he was asking for my permission, recognizing that my recent experiences with his absence and the threats against military families might make me reluctant to support assignments that involved additional risks. Marcus, you've dedicated your life to protecting people like me from people like the criminals my family was working with. If you can do that work from here, with a unit that specializes in eliminating those threats, then I want you to take the assignment. His smile was radiant, the expression of someone who'd been hoping for exactly that response but hadn't wanted to assume it would be forthcoming. Are you sure? This isn't just about my career advancement. This unit handles the kinds of operations that eliminate threats to military families, but the work is dangerous and often classified. I'm sure. I've learned that there are people in this world who prey on others, who use violence and corruption to achieve their goals. If you can be part of stopping them, then that's what you should do. Marcus leaned forward and kissed me with the intensity of someone who'd been afraid he might never see his wife again, who'd spent weeks in hostile territory, knowing that the person he loved most was facing threats from the same criminal organizations he was fighting. The kiss tasted like gratitude and promises, like new beginnings built on the foundation of everything we'd survived together. That night, we sat on the small patio behind our base housing and watched the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, the same body of water that had separated us during his deployment, and that now stretched endlessly toward a future we could finally plan together. The silence between us was comfortable now, filled with shared understanding rather than unspoken fears. "Zoe, I need to tell you something else about the operation my team conducted," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of information he'd been cleared to share. "We recovered financial records that showed your family's criminal associates had been planning to kidnap you if you continued cooperating with federal investigators." The revelation hit like cold water, shocking and clarifying at the same time. The threats I'd received hadn't been empty intimidation. They'd been warnings about actual plans to physically harm me in order to prevent my testimony. My family's criminal associates had been prepared to commit violence against me to protect their money laundering operation. The plan was to abduct you from San Diego and transport you to Prague, where you would have been held until you agreed to recant your testimony and claim that federal agents had coerced you into making false statements. The sophisticated nature of the plan suggested that my family's criminal associates operated with the kind of resources and ruthlessness that characterized international organized crime. They'd been prepared to destroy my life not just metaphorically but literally, treating me as a problem to be eliminated rather than a person with rights and dignity. But that's not going to happen now? The individuals responsible for that plan are no longer in a position to threaten anyone. Our operation was specifically designed to eliminate the leadership of this criminal network and retrieve evidence of their activities against American citizens. Marcus's matter-of-fact delivery couldn't disguise the personal satisfaction he took in describing the elimination of people who'd threatened his wife. The professional warrior and the protective husband had aligned perfectly in an operation that served both national security and personal justice. "How did you know about the kidnapping plan?" Intelligence agencies monitor communications between international criminal organizations and their American associates. When your family was arrested and their phones were seized, federal agents discovered evidence of the plan to abduct you. That intelligence was shared with military authorities, and my unit was tasked with neutralizing the threat. The coordination between federal law enforcement and military special operations had been seamless, designed to protect American citizens from international criminals while serving broader national security interests. My cooperation with federal investigators had triggered a chain of events that resulted in my protection and the elimination of threats to other military families. "Marcus, do you think my family knew about the kidnapping plan?" He was quiet for a long time, considering the question with the analytical approach he brought to complex tactical problems. "Based on the evidence my team recovered, your family was aware that their criminal associates were planning some kind of retaliation against you, but they may not have known the specific details. The possibility that my family had known I was in danger while refusing to warn me felt like the final betrayal, the ultimate proof that they'd chosen criminal loyalty over family protection. But it also explained their desperate attempts to contact me before their arrest. They'd known I was in immediate physical danger from people they'd introduced into our lives. Either way, they put you in danger by associating with international criminals, and they failed to protect you when those criminals decided you were a threat to their operations." Marcus stood up and extended his hand to help me to my feet, a gesture that felt both chivalrous and symbolic. We were moving forward together, leaving behind the people who'd endangered our marriage and threatened our future. The family I'd been born into had failed every test of loyalty and love, but the family I'd chosen was proving itself worthy of the sacrifices required to protect it. 6 months later, I received a letter from my mother, written from the federal correctional institution where she was serving her sentence. The letter was carefully worded, clearly reviewed by prison censors, but it contained what might have been the closest thing to an apology she was capable of offering. "Zoe, your father and I have had months to think about the choices we made, and the way those choices affected you. We know we hurt you badly, and we know we put you in danger by associating with people who turned out to be more dangerous than we realized. We hope that someday you might be able to forgive us, not because we deserve forgiveness, but because holding on to anger will hurt you more than it hurts us." I read the letter twice, then filed it in a folder with other legal documents related to their case. It wasn't an admission of guilt or an acknowledgement of the specific ways they'd betrayed me, but it was recognition that their actions had consequences for people they'd claimed to love. That recognition felt like enough closure for me to move forward without anger weighing down my future. Marcus's new assignment with the counterterrorism unit had proven to be everything he'd hoped for: challenging, meaningful work that directly protected American families from the kinds of threats we'd personally experienced. His deployments were shorter and less frequent, and his success in eliminating international criminal networks had earned him recognition from the highest levels of military leadership. I'd found work teaching at a school on the naval base, working with children from military families who understood the unique challenges of having parents who served in dangerous occupations. The job felt like a perfect fit, combining my love of education with my newfound understanding of the military community that had protected and supported me during the worst period of my life. The house we'd been assigned had gradually transformed from temporary quarters into a genuine home, filled with furniture we'd chosen together, and photographs that documented our life as a military family. The pictures on our walls showed Marcus in dress uniform receiving commendations, both of us at military social events, and casual moments that captured the happiness we'd built together after surviving everything that had tried to destroy us. One evening, while Marcus was cleaning his weapons at the kitchen table and I was grading papers on the couch, I realized that this was the life I'd actually wanted all along. Not the complicated drama of my birth family's criminal activities, not the pressure to choose between love and loyalty, but the simple satisfaction of building something meaningful with someone who shared my values and protected my safety. Marcus, do you ever regret marrying into my family's mess? He looked up from his disassembled rifle with the expression of someone who'd considered the question thoroughly. I regret that loving you put you in danger. I regret that your family's crimes threatened your safety and our marriage. But I don't regret marrying you. And I don't regret the way our situation allowed me to be part of eliminating international criminals who were targeting military families. The answer was perfectly Marcus, practical, honest, and focused on outcomes rather than emotions. He'd turned a personal crisis into professional opportunity, used his skills to protect not just me but other potential victims, and emerged from the experience with enhanced career prospects and deeper appreciation for what we'd built together. Do you think we'll ever hear from them again? They'll be in federal prison for at least 8 years, and after that, they'll be under supervised probation that restricts their travel and communications. But more importantly, they know that threatening you would bring consequences they can't survive. The protection Marcus offered wasn't just emotional support or legal advocacy. It was the kind of deterrent that came from being married to someone capable of eliminating threats with extreme prejudice. My family and their criminal associates had learned that Navy SEALs took threats against their families personally, and that lesson would follow them for the rest of their lives. Last month, I received notification that my family's PROG assets had been seized by international law enforcement, and that the funds were being distributed to victims of their money laundering operation. The $40 million development that they'd chosen over me had been confiscated entirely, leaving them with nothing to show for years of criminal activity except lengthy prison sentences and permanent criminal records. The money that had been so important to them, the criminal enterprise that had seemed worth sacrificing their daughter to protect, had evaporated completely. Meanwhile, the marriage they'd tried to destroy had grown stronger, the military career they'd threatened had flourished, and the life they'd dismissed as worthless had become more meaningful than anything they'd built through illegal means. Marcus and I were planning to buy our first house together, a small place near the naval base where we could start the family we'd been talking about since before his deployment. The future we were building had nothing to do with real estate development or international criminal networks. It was based on honest work, shared values, and the kind of love that had survived everything designed to destroy it. Sometimes I wondered what might have happened if my family had chosen differently. If they'd supported my marriage instead of viewing it as a threat. If they'd chosen legal business practices over criminal profits. But those hypothetical alternatives felt less important than the reality we'd created together. The life that had emerged from the ashes of everything I'd thought I wanted. The family that had abandoned me on my birthday had taught me that blood relationships meant nothing without loyalty and love. The family I'd chosen had taught me that real protection came from people who valued justice over convenience, truth over profit, and my safety over their own comfort. The difference was everything, and I'd never take it for granted again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.